All right, let's dive into something kind of infamous, shall we? Machiavellianism.
Hmm.
I bet you think like cutthroat tactics, right? Maybe even straight up villains, like those characters who always seem to be playing 4D chess with everyone else. But is that all there is to it?
Well, the historical context is often missed.
Okay, yeah, that's important.
Machiavelli wrote The Prince during some seriously chaotic times in Italy. It wasn't necessarily like, hey, be ruthless, more like trying to figure out how power actually worked when the world was basically a survival game.
So less about being evil, more about knowing the rules of a really, really dangerous game.
Exactly. But even then, even knowing all that, a big criticism is how Machiavellianism just like destroys
Yeah,
trust.
I get that. If it's all the ends justify the means, how do you build anything real with anyone? Always looking out for, number one, suspicious of everyone.
Absolutely. The bedrock of anything that lasts business, politics, even personal stuff, it's trust. And Machiavellianism, with all that manipulation and lying, just wrecks it.
Like building a house on sand. Sooner or later, the whole thing collapses. And this analysis you shared, it even says this approach can totally backfire on you. What's that about?
Okay, imagine being on guard constantly, assuming everyone's out to get you. It's like a pressure cooker. Never relaxing, never trusting anyone. That much stress, that much paranoia, it just wears you down.
So even if you claw your way to the top that way, you end up lonely and miserable. Doesn't sound like much of a victory to me.
It really makes you think, what is success if it's built on tricks and lies? Can it last? And what does it do to you, to the people around you?
Makes me think of Walter White in Breaking Bad.
Mhm.
Started out justifying everything to protect his family, but the deeper he got into that whole Machiavellian mindset, poof, moral compass gone, became the very thing he was afraid of.
Powerful example of how good intentions can get twisted. And when we zoom out to like society as a whole, it gets even scarier.
Because if the people in charge are always scheming, putting themselves first, what happens to everyone else?
You get fear, suspicion, things falling apart. People won't work together, won't trust institutions when they think the system is rigged against them.
A vicious cycle then, right? The more Machiavellian stuff happens, the less trust there is, so everyone feels like they need to be even more manipulative to survive.
A self-perpetuating system, and nobody wins in the end.
But hold on. While I see all those downsides, isn't there another side to this coin? Machiavelli also talked about understanding human nature, adapting to different situations. Couldn't that be valuable, even if you're not trying to, be a puppet master?
That's where things get interesting. Machiavelli wasn't just about blind ambition. He also emphasized being smart, thinking strategically, getting the nuances of power.
So it's more about awareness of those dynamics, not necessarily making them your personal playbook.
Exactly. And that distinction is key.
Okay, let's dig into that. Are you saying there's a way to use some of those Machiavellian principles, but, ethically?
Now that's a question worth exploring. And it takes us to another fascinating layer. The whole tension between individual gain and, the well-being of everybody else.
So how do we, balance this strategic awareness stuff with being an ethical leader? Sounds tricky.
It is. It takes a nuanced understanding, not just of Machiavelli's ideas, but of, how people work.
Right.
One trap with that purely Machiavellian view is it simplifies everything. Like human interactions, just this game with winners and losers.
Everyone's just a pawn to be moved around for your own benefit, right?
Yeah, exactly. But real relationships, they're way more complicated than that. We're not just isolated players fighting for dominance. We're all connected, part of a bigger web. Our actions have ripple effects, and the folks who are always manipulating, well, they often miss those long-term consequences.
So even being practical, Machiavellianism could backfire.
It often does. Think about it. When you build relationships on lies and tricks, what do you get? Suspicion, instability. You can't really get people to truly collaborate or be loyal, and those are essential for long-term success, whatever you're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. This analysis also talks about how this Machiavellian worldview can be self-destructive. You mentioned the stress and paranoia, but is there more to it?
Definitely. If you see the world as this constant power struggle, everyone's trying to get you, well, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You create a reality where you can't have trust or real connection. You might get power, but it costs you, real human connection.
So you could be surrounded by people and still be totally alone. That's kind of bleak.
It is. It speaks to something fundamental about us. We need connection. We need to belong. That purely Machiavellian approach denies that, leaves you feeling empty, isolated.
Makes you wonder if those so-called masters of manipulation are actually happy.
Right. What are we willing to give up for power? Is it worth it if we lose our integrity, our well-being?
This is really making me rethink what success even means. So where do we go from here? If being purely Machiavellian is unsustainable, are there other ways to navigate power, but ethically?
There are, and a lot of them draw inspiration from philosophies that are less, well, cynical. Ones that focus on things like collaboration, empathy, and a more, shall we say, sophisticated understanding of power.
So not ditching strategy and awareness altogether, but approaching them with different values.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true power isn't about forcing others to do what you want, it's about inspiring them, building real relationships based on trust and respect.
I like that. But let's be real, the world's a tough place. Aren't there times when you need a bit of that, I don't know, Machiavellian savvy to protect yourself, especially if everyone else is playing dirty?
That's a good point. And it highlights a crucial difference. Knowing about power dynamics isn't the same as being manipulative yourself.
Like knowing the rules of the game, but not becoming a player.
Precisely. You don't need to be a chess grandmaster to see when someone's trying to checkmate you.
Okay, I get that analogy. So it's more about developing awareness so you can make smart choices, protect yourself,
Hmm.
but without crossing your own ethical lines.
Exactly. It's using knowledge as a shield, not a weapon.
Makes a lot of sense. Finding that balance seems key. But how do we actually do that day to day? Can we cultivate this kind of ethical Machiavellianism, or is that just like a contradiction?
It starts with looking inward, understanding your own values, what success means to you, being mindful of how your actions impact others, and realizing that working together genuinely often gets you better, more fulfilling results than cutthroat competition.
So playing the long game, building trust, fostering respect, even in environments that make you want to go all Machiavellian.
Exactly. And remember, even Machiavelli himself talked about certain virtues, courage, prudence, understanding human nature. Those can be used ethically,
Yeah.
to navigate tough situations without resorting to manipulation.
So it's not an either-or thing. We can learn from him without becoming mini Machiavellis.
Exactly. We can take the insights that help us navigate the world strategically, ethically, but reject the stuff that goes against our values and ultimately leads to, well, self-destruction.
This deep dive is really making me rethink things. I'm seeing Machiavellianism less as a set of tactics and more like a mindset, one that sees the world as this zero-sum game. Someone always loses.
And that's a very limiting belief. Creates this cycle of distrust and competition that holds everyone back.
So how do we escape that cycle? How do we build a more collaborative and ultimately more successful approach to leadership and power?
We got to challenge those deep-seated assumptions about human nature, shift focus from control to connection, from manipulation to empowerment.
And maybe some self-reflection wouldn't hurt either. I mean, we've all had those moments, right, where you're tempted to go all Machiavellian, even if it's just to win a meeting or get a promotion.
Absolutely. Self-awareness is key. Recognizing those impulses and asking yourself, is this the kind of leader I want to be? Is this the legacy I want to leave?
Because how we use power says a lot about who we are.
Exactly. And the choices we make every day, they shape the world we build for ourselves and for future generations.
This has been eye-opening. We started with the dark side of Machiavellianism, but ended up with a much broader view of power, leadership, and the choices we make. If we're not trying to manipulate people, how do we use power effectively and ethically? Is that even possible?
That's the big question, isn't it? Philosophers and leaders have debated it for ages, but I think the answer is in understanding that real power doesn't come from dominating or controlling others, but from influence and inspiration.
Influence and inspiration. Those sound kind of, I don't know, almost too idealistic.
Mhm.
But how do you actually make them work? In the real world, how do you inspire people when it feels like everyone's just looking out for themselves?
Well, it's not about making people do what you want. It's about, setting things up so they want to follow you,
Okay.
where they see you as someone who's got their back, not just your own agenda.
So building trust, real relationships, not just barking orders.
Exactly. It's about getting people their motivations, what they're afraid of, what they want, and then using that to build a shared vision, something everyone can get behind.
That's definitely not the cutthroat Machiavellian stuff we started with.
Nope. And it's often way more effective in the long run. Think about the leaders you really admire. Are they the ones who rule by fear? Or the ones who inspire you with their vision, their integrity, their genuine care for others?
Yeah, good point. Makes the Machiavellian way seem kind of backwards, right?
Mhm.
Win a few battles, but lose the war.
Because real power isn't about forcing submission. It's about, helping people rise.
This has been a real trip.
Yeah.
I'm seeing Machiavellianism less as these manipulative tricks and more as a way of seeing the world, Like everything's a zero-sum game. If someone wins, someone else has to lose.
And that's just not true. It traps everyone in this cycle of distrust and competition.
So how do we break out of that? How do we create something more collaborative, more successful when it comes to leadership and power?
It starts with questioning those assumptions about human nature, the ones we take for granted. We got to shift from control to connection, from manipulation to empowerment.
And maybe a little bit of looking in the mirror wouldn't hurt. I mean, we've all been tempted to go Machiavellian sometimes, right? Even if it's just to get ahead at work or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. Self-awareness is crucial. Catching those moments when those impulses pop up and asking, is this really the kind of leader I want to be? Is this the legacy I want to leave behind?
Because ultimately, how we use power, it says a lot about us.
It does. And those choices we make every single day, they shape the world we're creating for ourselves and for the future.
So wrapping up our deep dive on Machiavellianism, I think what we've learned is this. It's not about blindly following or rejecting Machiavelli. It's about understanding the nuances of power, seeing the dangers of manipulation, and choosing a path that fits our values, our goals.
And maybe most importantly, remembering that real power isn't about dominating others, but about inspiring them, so we can all achieve great things together.
Wow, what a journey. We started exploring the dark side of Machiavellianism, but we ended up with a much bigger understanding of power, leadership, and the choices we all face. As you go about your day, think about this. What kind of impact do you want to have on the world? What kind of leader will you choose to be? Something to think about.